for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
You believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Welcome to the Andrew Zimmel podcast. I'm your host, always Andrew Zimmel. It is Television Tuesday. This is the podcast where we talk about what's on TV right now. And the other one we talked about sports, so this one we're talking about television. We're going to put this one for sure. We're going to get in the rhythm of putting out this episode every single Tuesday. So we're going to try to bring some guests on. We're going to talk about reality TV. We're going to talk about what shows came out over the weekend, what documentaries everybody's watching, what the national conversation or the pop culture conversation is right now about television. And, you know, this is something that when we talked about starting this podcast and we were going to go kind of out on our own, what we wanted to kind of do, this is something that I for sure said this is a staple of not only my personality, but I think of the personality of a lot of the people that were listening to the show, but not really, you know, getting tight into it, right? So when we were doing the Barry episodes during the HBO season, when we were doing the episodes about Game of Thrones at the end of the podcast, those really were the ones on the old show that people really enjoyed. Those are the ones people gravitated to, and we got a lot of really good feedback on those. The sports, we got good stuff on, and that was really what we love, and we'll live and breathe that forever. But I wanted to kind of give something for the people who didn't like the sports or liked the sports but didn't care as much about it and cared more about the pop culture and the television stuff. So, that said, Television Tuesday was born, and here we are on the first episode of Television Tuesday. So, a couple big things. One, Season 10 of Curb Your Enthusiasm came out. I really thought I want to talk about Curb Your Enthusiasm. I want to talk about Larry David. Want to kind of get into that. The meat and potatoes of the podcast is going to be that. Then, of course, the Hernandez Documentary, which took the internet by storm this weekend, and everybody could not stop talking about Aaron Hernandez. And was it CTE? Was it a victim of his environment? All the different types of stuff. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that documentary. And then at the end of the podcast, we're going to talk about what I'm watching. So, Larry David. I was introduced to Larry David. I was introduced to Seinfeld at a very young age. Both my parents, you know, late to 50s now, they kind of grew us up on Seinfeld. So while a lot of my friends, the show, the NBC show was on Netflix, and everybody could not stop talking about Parks and Rec, The Office, and Friends. It was like the holy trinity of annoying television characters to me. I was watching Seinfeld. I was growing up with Jerry and George and Elaine and Kramer. And the creator of the show, of course, Jerry Seinfeld, and Larry David. That's the type of comedy that I grew up on as a kid. So when I was introduced to Curb Your Enthusiasm about 5 years ago, it just felt like my childhood was reborn, right? And it's funny, because a lot of those Seinfeld episodes, you go back and you rewatch them as a adult, and you're thinking to yourself, at 12, I was laughing at maybe one of every 5 jokes. And as an adult, I'm laughing at 5 of the 5. It's one of the best shows, not only comedies, not only sitcoms, but one of the best shows in television history. So when Curb Your Enthusiasm showed up on my radar, I was immediately drawn to it, and I really liked it. And for those of you that haven't watched Curb, if those of you have missed out, I will say to you, you have missed out on 10 excellent seasons. And they're all streamable on HBO Go or HBO Now. So you want to go and check that out. HBO Max, I think, is coming out in a couple months. It'll all be there for you to watch them there, too. So, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David, it just felt like it feels like the perfect show for today's climate, too. So, in this show, they talked a little bit about They poke fun at like the MAGA hats, and they poke fun at the Me Too movement, and they just it feels like if Seinfeld was still on television today, if Seinfeld was coming on every Tuesday nights on NBC, right? If it was still relevant and current today, that would be Curb. Except that, you know, you get to be a little bit more raunchy, you get to be a little bit more real, I think, on HBO than you could on network television. So, comes out with season 10. I saw episode 1. I'm not going to give away any spoilers for it for those of you that haven't watched it, but I did want to start the podcast off on a Television Tuesday saying that this right now is going to be the best show on television for the time being. The other show that came out recently that I didn't care too much about, and I'm probably never going to watch a single episode of the show, but I thought that it would be worth mentioning it here, and just the dichotomy, or the difference between a show that I think is perfectly made versus a show that I feel is only made for the money. If you haven't seen, I think it's on Fox. It's called 911, right? So it's just another one of those cop shows, ambulance shows, and it's fine. I've seen a couple episodes of that show in particular. It's they'll have the replays on another one of those syndicated channels. It's fine. It's nothing to write home about. Now they bring Rob Lowe in, and they're doing 911 Lone Star, which is now it's the same kind of concept of the show, which is focusing on ambulance and firefighters and police. They're taking that and they're making Rob Lowe a firefighter, and they're focusing it in Austin, Texas, which I've saw the previews for it, and I'm continually questioning who they make these television shows for, because I know that they're not for me. Spin-offs I've never been a really big fan of. There's only about 3 that actually make sense. I don't think Curb is a spin-off of Seinfeld. I think Curb kind of feels like its own thing in that regard. But if you look at spin-offs of the shows, Better Call Saul on AMC, a spin-off of Breaking Bad. That show seems to have a lot of critical success. I watched season 1 of that show. Really didn't buy into it, But you got to respect when the show works, when there's an audience for something, you got to respect it. You can't just poo-poo it off. So I'm not throwing it away. I'm just saying that for me, didn't do a whole lot for me. It did not reignite the fire I had for Breaking Bad, which was one of the greatest shows of all time. Another good spin-off would probably be, of course, Frasier from Cheers. That would probably be number 2 on the list of really good spin-offs out of a show. And I really, you think about it off the top of your head, I can't come up with a third one for a good spin-off show of what a successful deal. And 911, critically, I do not think it's as successful as those before-mentioned shows. I think this is a money grab. And that's what I wanted to kind of talk about, too, is that Curb is on the schedule of Larry David. If Larry David wants to make another season, he will make another season, and the audience will 100% be there. Part of it is because HBO is a subscription-based service, and you're subscribing to see that content, unlike the network televisions that you're just paying cable for. But the audience will always be there. I don't think I have seen an episode of any real HBO show that didn't feel like they were thought out. Maybe the last season of Game of Thrones may have missed a couple beats, to be completely honest with you. It probably missed a handful of beats. But for the most part, a lot of these HBO shows, they're clicking, they're all going, they all have thought behind them, I should say. 911 Lone Star does not feel like it has any thought behind it. Feels like this is another money grab. So I want to talk about that. Aaron Hernandez. So we'll get into that. We're about, this is where sports and, television collide. Okay? So the Aaron Hernandez documentary, I had been told about this documentary. People had been pushing this documentary for a long time. Netflix, this is they have about 2 or 3 every year where it's this is the go-to pop culture documentary. Fire Festival was the one, I think, a year ago, 2 years ago now. Feels like a long, long time ago. But it was, I think, a year ago that they had Fire Festival. And that was the documentary that really everybody was gravitating to because we lived through it, and now we get to see a little bit of the background. So the Hernandez documentary is that, but for sports people who remember having training camp go on and having the Patriots players have to answer questions about a tight end who, if we're being completely honest, wasn't a very well-known name for those casual NFL fans. For the casual NFL fan, the last thing that they really remember from Aaron Hernandez, playing-wise, was his touchdown in the Super Bowl against the Giants in 2011. But for the rest of the casual NFL public, maybe somebody that didn't really care that much about the Patriots, this kind of felt like another NFL player gets in trouble with the law, and that's just how it is. This is before Ray Rice. This is before Tyreek Hill. This is before Kaepernick. This is prior to all of those other really big moments in the 21st century for the NFL. This probably would be the first big moment in the 2010s for the NFL. A very turbulent decade for the Shield, to be completely honest with you. So everybody's talking to me about this documentary. Everybody's telling me about how I need to see this Hernandez documentary, between Instagram putting the trailer up every third post, and Twitter getting the retweets and having it on my timeline all the time. And then it comes out and all my friends are texting me and calling me and telling me, hey, you need to see this Hernandez documentary. This is a great documentary. So I went to my friend Jacob's house, who we had on talking about Uncut Gems. Went over to his house, and they had seen part of the first episode of, it's a 3-part documentary. So they'd seen part of episode 1, so we rewatched episode 1, and I left after the first part of this documentary, because it didn't grab my interest. I was not as intrigued with this documentary as I think the rest of the viewing public. So then I go later and I watch part 2 and part 3, and I can honestly tell you I am not that impressed by this doc. I think 90% of it is the fact that I remember this Hernandez trial, and I was on the East Coast at the time when this trial was going on. So I was in Virginia, and the whole proceedings were happening in Massachusetts, so it was very close. So the local news when I was living in Virginia, or over there during the summer, they had it on constantly, and SportsCenter was talking about it constantly. So I remember the details of this trial. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. This isn't a spoiler because it's a documentary, and at this point, I think everybody has seen or heard the big reveal. And the big reveal for this was that Aaron Hernandez may or may not have been gay. And I don't think that is as big of a deal as I think people are making a bigger deal out of it than it really is. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It has little to no effect on my life. Now, what does have effect on my life is the fact that Hernandez killed upwards of 4 people. And that, to me, should be the bigger takeaway from this documentary. But it feels like Netflix, from where I'm sitting, it feels like Netflix did another one of those, hey, here's a really good story that doesn't need us to make this doesn't need to make it salacious, doesn't need the story by itself. An NFL tight end who's on his way to becoming one of the better players in the NFL kills some people. That's a salacious story enough. That's a good enough story by itself. I don't think that we need to add on all this other stuff. Now, maybe, playing devil's advocate, maybe this is just part of the story. And maybe they didn't mean for it to be salacious. Maybe they didn't mean for this to be the big takeaway that the general viewing public had of this documentary. But again, from where I'm sitting, it feels like Netflix did everything they could to make that first episode as salacious, as, cotton candy, I want to say, almost. As reality TV as they could in that first episode. First part, I guess, of the documentary. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't think that it was that good. I think that people are very overhyping what is a open and shut case in a lot of ways. So, Aaron Hernandez doc, I'm going to give it I've been doing these, TV review or the movie reviews for the University Star, and we've been doing it out of a 5 star rankings. I'd give this documentary a 2 out of 5, honestly. And maybe going forward, they don't do stuff like this. I'm more excited for that last season of Jordan coming out in June with the Bulls team. I'm 100% more excited for that documentary. It's like a 10-part documentary. It's going to be on ABC and ESPN. I'm 100% more excited for that doc than I am for any of these other Netflix documentaries. All right, last thing before I let you go, we're going to talk about what I've been watching. I have a TV recommendation for you. It's on Hulu. If you stream on Hulu, this is a TV show that I think that you should check out. I didn't check it out. It was on one of those trailers that you see before you are watching your reality TV shows on the tape delay reality TV shows that I watch. I skip through The Bachelor and the Bachelorette to get to the best parts. So it's called Remy, and I don't want to butcher the synopsis of this, but it's essentially the story revolves around this Egyptian American guy living in New Jersey trying to kind of find himself. So it's one of those self-reflecting, self-finding type of television shows. It's a comedy, so I really like that. It follows a Muslim American too, so there's like a layer of that. And I really like those type of shows. I talked about it in the Little Women review, how I really like to see diversity on screen. I really like to see different cultures portrayed, and hopefully as realistically as possible, so maybe I can get some information. Maybe I learn something from a show that for the most part, it's just a comedy, right? So like we talk about shows on ABC a lot. They have a really good job of kind of doing diversity. Blackish with Anthony Anderson is a show that at its core is a comedy. It's a sitcom, family sitcom, but as a straight white man watching the show, I feel like it does open my eyes to some stuff, and I think that they do a really good job on that show of kind of they don't sugarcoat anything. I think that it's real. I think it's a real, heartfelt show, and I think that this show on Hulu is very similar. The only thing I didn't like about it was that it's like a 13 episode season. I'm not a big fan of 13 episodes. I like 10 or less for my shows, or I like 15 or more. 13 just didn't feel like the right number for this show. And maybe they said, okay, we're going to do 10. Oh, we got 3. We have extra budget money. Okay, we're going to go and do like 3 more episodes. Maybe that was part of it. But it felt like this should have been a 10 episode season, and they kind of stretched it a little bit too long. So that's what I'm watching right now. If you have any watches that you want to suggest, if you have anything that you want to talk about on the podcast, or you want me to talk about on the podcast, shoot them my way at Andrew_Zimmel on Twitter, or a lot of you that listen to the show currently have the ways of getting in contact with me. So send those television shows recommendations in. Send if you want to review a show, let me know, and we'll try to get you on the podcast and breaking it down for us. So Television Tuesdays, every Tuesday, that's what we're doing here on the Andrew Zimmel podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. Again, a lot of really good feedback that we've gotten so far, so that's really great. Thank you. Please continue to send it to all your friends. That's the only way that we can get bigger, right? Love you guys. I'll see you around.